Hello, everyone. Welcome to Building the Case for CX Transformation. Happy to be here. Thank you for joining. My name is Lynn Olson, and I am the VP of Customer Experience for PTP. For those of you that don't know, PTP is a professional services organization that helps customers with their CX transformation and customer experience solutions. More importantly, I have the pleasure of sitting next to, virtually, Fred Lee. Fred, say hello.
Hello.
And Fred will be talking today. I'm just doing a quick intro. And PTP's had the pleasure of partnering with Fred for the past several years and have right now supporting Fred's CX transformation at CARS. So I'm gonna pass it to Fred quickly since we have a short amount of time and we're gonna get started. So Fred, if you can please take it from here.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Lynn. Hi, everyone. So as Lynn said, we're gonna be talking about building the case for CX transformation. So real quick, just as a point of introduction, whoops. My name is Fred Lee, and right now, currently I'm the CTO at cars.com. And there's my email address, and that's my Twitter handle. We're going to go through a number of things at a relatively high level, so feel free to please reach out, email me with any questions or things you want to discuss. So let's get into it. So first of all, I think it's really important that we kind of agree upon and triangulate around what we mean by CX transformation. And so this is my definition of it. And I think of CX transformation as the ongoing act of connecting the systems, processes, people, and data that touches all parts of the customer lifecycle for the purposes of improving the customer experience. So a lot of words there, but there's a few key elements I feel like we should talk about. So first of all, it's an ongoing act. Act, I think, is important because there's action, it's proactive, not reactive. And it's ongoing, meaning that I'm not really sure if this really ever ends. And I think it's because business changes, customers change, lots of things change. Now there might be like a spike in effort and planning up front, and then you kind of get to a little bit more of a steady state, but it should be a continuous activity in an organization. The second thing is that it's the systems, the processes, the people, and the data. It's all of these things. It's not just the system, and it's not just a process, and it's not just the people that you have working on this or the information they have or don't have. It's all of these things that are that need to be connected. And it's all parts of the customer lifecycle. I think sometimes we think of customer experience as only kind of isolated to maybe the activities that the customer support team does. But I think of it as it includes the B2B marketing email that they might get, or it includes what it's like when they want to cancel on you and so forth. Or it might even include, let's say, connections that you might have on social media channels and so forth. So my point being that it should be all of these things need to be part of CX and the transforming of it. And then finally, it's got to be about improving the customer experience. I think many people would go, isn't that an obvious statement? But I actually think many organizations think of CX transformation as an efficiency play. They think of it in terms of like, I need to get my internal teams more efficient. But I actually think that's like a good outcome of really good customer experience transformation. I think that though the kind of like the main point, the main kind of like thing that you got to focus on is improving your customer's experience. Okay, so that's CX transformation defined by me. One thing I want to make sure that we all take away is that your CRM is not customer experience. I hear this a lot in my organization as well. And in fact, when we talk about our CX transformation, very often people refer to it for us as like a CRM transformation. My CRM is a really important part of this, but it is not customer experience. In fact, it's going back to my definition, it's one of the systems and processes and the data that's a part of the CX. All right, so so there's that. So let's get into what I'm here to share with you all today. So 3 steps I took to build the case for CX transformation. And I think probably many of us in some ways or another have taken some of these steps, maybe a little bit here and there, but I just want to share my story and what I did. Okay, and those 3 steps, I'm going to kind of lay them out here. It looks something like this. Step 1, define and expose. Step 2, envision and evangelize. Step 3, map it and start it. And we'll dig into each one of these in the time that we have. So first of all, there's a step 0, and I kind of lied. Partner up. I happen to partner up with PTP. There are other partners that you can partner up with, but I really think this is important if you can do this for the following reasons. So one is a partner brings other experiences and other solutions to the table. The right partner is gonna basically have done this before in other industries and other platforms and other things where the overall strategy is applicable, and there's just new insights that you can bring to your problem set. The second thing I think is important is no baggage. There's a lot of situations where internal team members, whether they realize it or not, bring to the table a certain amount of baggage that is good because it's historical context, but it's also kind of bad at times because it doesn't allow for like an open sort of dialogue and conversation for what is possible and what can really happen to improve your customer's experience. And interestingly enough, I've also found that when I bring a partner to the table, there's a credibility that gets kind of brought to the table, with the right partner, this is all going to work really well. And then the last thing, this is a little bit more for me and kind of, let's call it a little selfish, like I need the advocacy and I need the support. Trying to do this is a very difficult thing for any of us. It can be overwhelming, and just having somebody being like, you're doing the right thing and sort of like being your champion is really sort of invaluable. Hold on there, switch. Okay, so step 1 in building the case for CX transformation is define and expose. So what I mean by this is that there are so many things that are part of CX, inclusive of everything we just talked about. And there's all these like words and kind of language and things that get used to like try to really figure out what we mean by all of this. So the first thing I did was I created a cross-functional team. It was sales, it was marketing, it was support, it was design, it was product, it was tech. And I even invited vendors, including my CRM vendor, my billing vendor, and PTP, for example. And we started to meet. It started out like once a week. And everyone, I think what was difficult at first was like everyone's busy, right? But when we started to like kind of paint the vision of what is currently happening and what was possible, like the interesting thing was there was quite a bit of energy, and a lot of people got like excited about like what we were talking about. And so what we're doing is we're just trying to figure out like, hey everyone, like what is currently true, like what is happening. And I think without this kind of cross-functional team that's trying to look at this holistically, what you typically have is each department understanding what's happening, but not necessarily connected. And then again, alignment on common language. And I'll get into some examples in just a little bit, but just things like, what do we mean by this is like surprisingly very confusing. And then the third thing is just having lots of conversations. I mean, part of it is for the purposes of analysis and alignment, but honestly, like a big part of it was just kind of team building. It was just sort of like, there's sort of like value and strength in people dealing with all these problems, kind of like sharing their issues, and then also sharing their solutions with one another. So there's a lot of positivity out of that. So here's an example of one of the definition outcomes that we had. we got together and we basically built this that you're looking at. And, don't look too close. It's not meant to be like, I don't necessarily mean for you to understand this, but this is just an example of how we got together and we started to go like, so for example, like in top left corner, it says prospecting. Like that word is very simple, but like, what do you mean by prospecting? Like, what are the steps and the processes that are like included in that phase? And sort of everything underneath is the work that cross-functional team did to try to define that. And every one of these little arrows, if you were to double click into it, there would be more definitions. And you can kind of like start to see how this can get super complicated, like really quickly, when these words don't necessarily mean the same thing to everybody. And when each of these kind of life cycle changes are the responsibility of different departments. And all those departments are trying to get themselves more efficient, and they're focusing on their internal metrics, not on what the CX should be for the customer. So a big definition point that we had was, who is the customer? And again, feels obvious, but again, without really talking about it and doing some work, like it wasn't necessarily the same for everybody. And so for example, at cars.com, we actually have, we came up with 3 customers. And so we have the dealer who has vehicles on their lot that they're trying to sell. We have our OEM partners who are the ones that you're seeing on the screen. And then we have the person who's buying the car. And so 3 different kind of customers, customer experiences, and they are all looking for what different great experiences. And so for example, with the dealer, he or she is just basically like, send me some leads, and I'll once that person steps on my lot, I'll wheel and deal them, and we'll get the sale done. And the OEM, interestingly enough, like one of the things they want is they want traffic to their sites. Just very different outcomes and what good is. And then of course, like the car buyer is just wanting to find the right vehicle for themselves when there's all these complicated things to consider. So just an example of how doing the work to just really refine and define what do we mean by all these things was the activity. So kind of like step 1, right? Step 2, envision and evangelize. So I would say to my team, that cross-functional team, we're only swinging for home runs, no singles. So I love baseball. I watch a lot of baseball, and I love the strategy part of it. And there's this kind of like analytics and metrics part of how baseball is played these days, where there's enough data and analytics that basically says that like it is better to swing for home runs and strike out than it is to try to manufacture runs by hitting singles. And we would talk about this because it was an important point of philosophy, I guess, because whenever we would think about solutions and things like that, it was like there was always like an incremental thing you could do, but we would always back up and go like, no, but what's the home run that we want to hit with all of this? And so I just wanted to share, like, that's what we were going for. Here's an example of some of the work and the work product that we produced. And again, no need to really read all of this, but we came up with these kind of like super important objectives in terms of like, what are we trying to do? Unify holistic customer view, reduce customer effort, provide good persistent CX. We really felt the word persistent was important. Be better advisors, empower our customers. And we're all kind of like trying to hit a home run with all of these things. Another important step was we took each of those kind of main objectives sort of at the top, and then we mapped them to each of the internal functions. We really felt like this was an important part of the next step, because I think, many of us who've tried to do this, you will usually have something like this, where you've got like some mission statement, some set of views and objectives. But I think this part is where the rubber meets the road, and it starts to become like, okay, what does this really mean for sales? What does this really mean for customer service, and on and on? And we got, this is just like a one slide view of it, but we got into some really deep detail around all of this. The other thing is I had to learn to speak the language that mattered at Cars, at least at that time. It doesn't mean it's always this language forever, but it means that at that time at Cars, the language that I had to speak was financials, budget, forecasting for what this project was going to mean, what the ROI was going to be from a financial perspective. And so we did that as well. And so again, this is just like a really simple slide view of a lot of analysis that went into this in order to get, I guess, support and backing for what I was talking about in terms of CX transformation. So through analysis and forecasting and things like that, we could get to these numbers for why this is going to matter in terms of what's going to happen at the end of this transformation. The other thing is that as I was pulling together all of this and the work that we're talking about, like I started to pull the very best people in the org, at least from my perspective. I think this is one of those things where it's such a big initiative that I wanted to go after, get onto the initiative on the teams, the best people in each of the sales enablement functions, the marketing functions, the customers, you know, and it's as much about expertise and knowledge of the business and the systems, but it's also, I guess, like engagement in what we were trying to do. And then after all of that, what I went on was what I call the roadshow. And so, well, what's a roadshow? It was one-on-one meetings with 20 to 30 key stakeholders, people in the organization. And there's a couple reasons why I had to do this. So one is I had to look them in the eye and understand whether or not they were going to be a supporter of what we were talking about or a detractor from it. And that sounds like, you know, a little fluffy, but like really important for building this kind of dialogue. And then the third thing is like, I really wanted their feedback and I wanted their objections. I wanted to hear what was good and bad and right or wrong with what I was proposing. And so the way this worked was I prepared a deck. You know, it was a fairly robust deck, but the deck looked a lot like any kind of business pitch, any kind of you know, product or design pitch. It was sort of like, here's what we're trying to do, here's what problems we're trying to solve. You know, some of the slides you just saw earlier included, you know, are straight up pulled from those. Like, so for example, this slide and these slides are pulled from that. And I just set up one-on-ones with 20 to 30 people and had this conversation for about an hour. Oftentimes when I tell this part of the story, people go like, oh my gosh, wasn't that super time consuming? And how did you pull, you know, how could you do that? And well, the way I think about it is if I were to pull those 30 people into a room and present them this deck, like it just wouldn't go anywhere. Like I'd probably get stuck on slide one and there would be all these questions and all this kind of stuff. And I think it's just like, that's not, it's efficient, but it's not effective, right? And then the other thing is that everybody absorbs information, processes information, and provides feedback in different ways. And when I gather 30 people in a room, there's always people who have probably very important things to say, but they just don't want to raise their hand and say it at the time. And so with the one-on-one situation, it allowed me to really get that open dialogue. And the other added bonus to this is that by the time I got to like the 10th one of these, I had heard all the feedback and all the objections. Like they were pretty much universally the same. And so the back half, the next 10, the next 15, it like my pitch and the words and the deck had been so finely honed that it was like really like smooth, like very easy to do. And then, you know, like the other kind of objective in all this that I'm not really bringing up here is that like at the end of the day, what I'm trying to get to is that I've got, at the end of all of this, I've got 20 to 30 key stakeholders in the business, basically all on board. Like in other words, like the decision's like made. The rest of it's a formality. Step 3 is map it, and then let's start it. So this is where I'm going to bring this back up. Seriously, at this point, you probably should partner up. For all the reasons I said earlier, it's going to really help you. So customer journey maps. I'll start by saying I'm not an expert in customer journey mapping. There are experts in this, and you should seek them out for this. But I've come to really appreciate what a good customer journey mapping uh, discipline and a set of processes can do for you in all of this. So, well, what is it? Well, just roughly, it's taking various inputs, um, understanding processes, kind of combining all these things together with deliverables so that you understand what your customer is experiencing kind of end to end with your business and your services. So for example, you might do some customer research, you might do interviews, you'll do some workshops and create a framework. And like, there's lots of ways to do this from a framework perspective. But at the end of the day, what you're really just trying to do is let's map out what the customer's journey is with you. Let's also include in that mapping the processes that you do to enable that journey. What systems does it touch? What things do you need? And then I think like a really important part to this is like, in that part of the journey, is the customer like happy or not? Like, are you delivering great experiences to them? And so you do all of this and you start to get what's sort of like on the right side, this visualization around like what's happening to the customer across that journey. So the way I think about this is that customer journey maps will reveal the process and system or lack of those that causes pain points. So I'll give you like a real world example. If certain things line up, it is possible that a new customer to Cars on their first day can get anywhere from 6 to 8 different emails. Now, that's obviously a bad experience. But how does that happen? Well, that happens because it probably started out as one email. And that one email was probably some kind of a welcome email. We're glad to have you as a customer, which made perfect sense. But some other function, and let's just use one arbitrarily, let's say the onboarding kind of product provisioning team, fulfillment team, decided, well, like we need some information from this customer in order to fulfill their product. And we're going to send them an email. So now you got 2 emails, right? For 2 different purposes. Somebody in marketing probably thought, well, we should send them some kind of branding kind of email that sends them some interesting articles and blah, 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 right? And so what's happening here is that you've got different functions working in different systems, doing what they think is best, but without understanding the journey and what's happening to that customer. Oftentimes it's overlooked as to like what actually happened. So that's just like one example. Okay, just to wrap this up, I want to provide a couple key takeaways and just in review, I guess, right? So one, define and expose. Again, very difficult. So don't assume that I guess everybody understands the same words in the same way. This takes work to do that. The way I did it was I pulled a cross-functional team together to start having these conversations, and we produced artifacts like that kind of like that map that I showed you, and we worked real hard to be like, well, what do these words mean, and how do we think about this? And step 2 is to envision and evangelize. We took a principle of trying to hit home runs that led to the different objectives we were trying to hit. It led to sort of like, at least for me, understanding what language I needed to at least partially speak in, which was financially. And then I put together a deck and I evangelized it. I went and talked to 20 to 30 people one-on-one and had these conversations that were by the end of that, we were all pretty much on the same page in terms of what the vision is, what we're trying to do, and everybody was in agreement. Step 3, map it and start it. Using customer journey maps to understand not only what the journey is, but I think very importantly, at each step of the journey, what are the processes, what are the systems, who are the people that touch that point of the journey, and what's done to understand the pain points. And by doing that, you can know sort of like where to start. Okay, and that's it. So there's me, my contact information again. This is very high level, and I'm happy to hear your follow-up questions if you have any. And that was building the case for CX transformation, and just want to thank you all.
All right.